no hay alcohol, y no hay alcohol, y no hay alcohol, y no hay más que pasión.
Y aquí estamos arrancando, finalmente estamos grabando de nueva cuenta un episodio más de Expeditos, ya en la segunda temporada. Gabriel, ¿cómo estás? ¿Qué tal?
Hola Carlos, qué gusto, sí, aquí nuevamente, buenas noches, saludos para todos.
Noches porque pues, estamos grabando en la noche.
Bueno.
Así se nos da, ¿verdad? De repente noche, de repente mañana, ya no sabemos cuándo.
Ya balconé la hora, pero bueno, aquí andamos.
Pues aquí andamos, esa es la idea. Y justamente, fíjate, Gabriel, que ahora, de la entrevista que nos aventamos la última vez con Jay Stinnett, que fue el productor del documental del Contacto Consciente, él
Sí.
me puso en contacto con un historiador de Alcohólicos Anónimos que acaba de escribir un libro que se llama Escribiendo el Libro Grande. Y entonces ahora sí me tocó entrevistarlo, ¿cómo ve?
No, súper interesante. Fíjate que desde la primera entrevista, y me comentaste más o menos, a mí me llamó increíblemente la atención, ¿no? De toda esta parte que de alguna forma es medio desconocida, ¿no? En Alcohólicos Anónimos y súper interesante. Entonces, pues bueno, esta entrevista, pues también yo la estoy esperando, Charlie.
Así es, para los que somos Alcohólicos Anónimos y ya tenemos nuestros años en este rock and roll, pues es interesante conocer la historia, ¿no? Dice justamente que se enfoca, son 2 años del 37, de 1937, que plantearon escribir este libro, a 1939 que lo publicaron. Y entonces echa datos que yo no sabía, la verdad, muy interesantes acerca de Bill, de Bob, de los grupos Akron, de la mano derecha de Bill W., que nuestro amigo Bill, que es el escritor, dice que sin este señor no habría habido libro grande, por lo menos no en ese momento, ¿no? Y un montón de otros datos. Así es que,
Oye,
¿cómo ve?
sí, pues justamente ahorita antes te preguntaba, ¿no? El
Sí.
libro azul, que lo conocemos en todo el mundo, básicamente lo escribió Bill, ¿verdad? Así es, ¿no?
Pues fundamentalmente es lo que asevera él. Digo, entre las cosas que ya van a escuchar, dice que pidió mucha ayuda a Bob allá en Akron. Bob, muy ocupado ayudando a recuperar gente, realmente no reaccionó, dice.
Ok.
Dice que fundamentalmente, fuera del capítulo para las esposas, la opinión del médico y algunos detalles más, todo lo demás. Es más, creo que hasta lo de las esposas se lo avienta Bill W., es lo que dice. No,
Ese
fue la
capítulo.
opinión del médico y hay otra cosa que no escribió él, pero hasta lo de las esposas, donde dice, nosotros somos las esposas de los... También es Bill W. escribiendo, ¿cómo ve?
No, súper interesante. Yo creo que, pues sí, para quienes estamos involucrados y que, bueno, que nuestra vida de ahí surgió, esta nueva vida, bueno, pues yo estoy súper fascinado con esta historia. Además, me comentabas algo, Charlie, que este señor que escribe este libro, bueno, se ha metido a profundidad y a corroborar fuentes, ¿no?
Sí, es correcto. Según su propio dicho, porque es lo que él dice, es muy riguroso, es un historiador muy riguroso. Entonces dice que hasta que no tiene los pelos de la burra en la mano, él no puede considerar que algo sea un hecho fáctico, algo que ya pueda aseverar como un hecho. Entonces suena muy serio y hablamos de un montón de cosas. Este librito, pues que a mí me salvó la vida, ha
Nada más.
vendido 37 millones de copias. Y entonces habla del proceso, cómo se escribió, muchos datos. Dice, por ejemplo, que hay mucho mito en lo que se cuenta acerca de cómo empezó AA y muchas otras
La
cosas.
verdad, yo estoy muy emocionado, espero que quienes nos escuchen también. Alguien dijo, nada más para concluir, que si esta enfermedad era incurable, este programa y este libro es infinito y a pesar del tiempo que llevamos, yo sigo descubriendo cosas apasionantes y maravillosas, así que pues adelante Charlie
welcome. And here we are with, I'm sorry, your last name is Bill.
Schaberg.
Okay, that's why I don't remember. See, that's quite complicated. And Bill here has written a book about the big book. Am I right, Bill?
Yeah, it's about the writing of the big book, basically. You know, the first time they mentioned a book was in October of 1937. They said, hey, we should write a book. And 18 months later, they published the book. So my book focuses primarily on that 18-month period. There's a bit of information before that and a bit of information after that, but that's really what it covers. It's just what happened when they wrote the book. And I spent a bunch of time in the AA archives, and I was amazed at how much information was there that had never been published.
Okay. Okay. So, just for starters, how long did it take you to write this book?
I researched and wrote it for 11 years. I was writing for the last 7 of those 11 years, and then we circulated it with other AA historians, and with my wife and I, the lady Sarah, polished it for another year. It was published in November of 2019, so we're just coming up on 6 years.
Okay, so all in all, 11 years. Am I understanding this well?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, 11 years, and it's you know, Carlos, it's a scholarly book. I mean, I've done other books, you know, and one of the problems I always have with the AA history books is, first of all, they seem to repeat a lot of stories that basically aren't historically true. They're great stories for helping people get sober, but they're not necessarily historically accurate. But my book has 416 informational footnotes at the bottom of the page.
Okay.
But then there's citations. If you want to know where I got that fact or where I got that quote or where I heard that, there's 1,570 endnotes telling you where all that stuff came from. So it's a scholarly book. You know, my first book was on the German philosopher Nietzsche, which was footnoted and endnoted. You know, so
okay, very simple. Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Very simple subject, right?
Well, no, it wasn't. I spent 5 years researching and writing that one. Yeah.
No, I know about Nietzsche, so I know it's very complex. Nevertheless, how did you come up? I mean, how did you first started thinking about writing a book about writing the big book? Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's kind of a convoluted story. I'm a rare book dealer, and I specialize in first edition philosophy books, but I've also sold science books and psychology books, and at times in the past I've sold AA first editions. So I was perusing an auction catalog one day, and they were offering a bunch of books from Jim Burwell. Now, Jim Burwell was the original New York atheist in New York. He was the guy who was always ranting and raving that they didn't need any of this God bunk, he called it. And this was 5 books that Jimmy had owned, and they were being auctioned off. So I showed that to my wife, and she was like, oh man, we got to buy those books. We're big Jim Burwell fans. So I bought the books. And one of the books was a copy, Jim's copy of the Multilith printing. Now, several weeks before the big book was published in April of 1939, in mid-February of 1939, they offset printed a bunch of copies of this book to send to all the people in the program and the doctors and psychiatrists and priests and rabbis to make sure they weren't publishing anything that was going to get them in trouble or you know, just annoy people. They didn't want to. They didn't want to be doing that. So that's called the Multilith copy, and it's called the some people call it the original manuscript. And I bought Jimmy's original manuscript, and I'm a rare book dealer, so I want to know how many copies of this thing were printed. How rare is it? Now, Bill Wilson always said there's 400 of these things were printed, but I find out there was other people were saying other things. So I know for a fact, and it's well documented, that they spent $165 on the Multilith printing when they got the printing done. So I applied to GSO, General Service Office in New York City, which has a fabulous archive, to go down there and do some research. And what I was looking for was the invoice for the $165 Multilith printing, so I could find out how many copies had been printed. As I said, Bill always says 400.
400.
There's a contemporary letter from Frank Amos that says 300. Jimmy Burwell has this thing he had a special cover made for this book of his that says one of the first 100. So anyhow, I went down there. I got permission. I went down there and I started looking for that stuff. And I was looking for in the the early 1939s. And I never found an invoice. I mean, I've been to GSO, I've been to Stepping Stones, I've been to Cleveland, I've been to Akron, I've been to Brown University it has the largest temperance and alcohol collection in the world. And I've been to the Rockefeller Archive. No invoice. So I still don't know how many copies were printed of that thing. I suspect there's less than 50 of them left, but I don't really know. But as they were giving me these documents from early 1939, I started noticing that there was black and white contradictions in the letters that were written at the time to some of the stories that I had been told after many, many years in AA. So I just started backtracking and asking if they'd show me more and more stuff. And they kept showing me more and more stuff. And I ended up, I'm about an hour and a half drive from the archive in New York. And I would drive down there and get there early in the morning at 9 o'clock. And I would leave about 3 o'clock before the traffic got bad. And I spent days and weeks and months going down to GSO. They've got a wonderful, a fabulous collection down there. And they've got a fabulous archivist. Michelle Mirza was just tremendously helpful, tremendously supportive of everything I was doing.
You're talking about the offices in New York, right? Not about Stepping Stones.
Absolutely. On Riverside Drive, on the 11th floor of the building across from Riverside Church. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So very, very interesting. And 400 copies. So if I'm understanding this well, you don't know whether there were 400.
No, I never found out. But again, what I did find out was a whole bunch of information that had never been put out anywhere before. And sometimes it was I always say I was like a detective in the archive. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, you find a piece in New York City and then you go to Brown University and you find a different piece, and you go to the Rockefeller Archive and you find a different piece, and you go to Stepping Stones and they've got a great archive there. You find it, and all those things have to be put in chronological order and then see how they relate and how they work with each other. And there was tremendous details to the stories. I mean, in some cases, I'm going almost day by day, week by week for sure. I rarely go month by month. I mean, there was just all this wonderful information in there. So I'm looking at Lois's diaries. They've got Lois's diaries at the Stepping Stones archive. Bill Wilson writes the first 2 chapters of the book in May and early June of 1938, and they send off the first 2 copies. They're trying to raise money because they want to have a string of hospitals and they want to have paid missionaries and they want to have a book. They send off this thing to a New York banker on June 17th to see if he would give him an appointment and maybe they could get some money out of him. But in Lois's diary, according to Lois's diary, on June 28th, just a few days later, she and Bill had a big fight. They had a big fight. And he stormed out of the house and said, "Screw you, Lois, I'm going to go drink."
Okay.
But he didn't go to the bar. He went to Hank Parkhurst, his right-hand man in New York, who actually lives over in New Jersey, Montclair, New Jersey. He went over to Hank Parkhurst's house and didn't drink that day. But I mean, can you imagine? You and I wouldn't be sitting here talking about this if Bill Wilson drank in June of 1938. The whole thing would come apart at the seams. So one of the things that was really interesting to me was so many different places where this could go off the rails, or places where it was going in this direction and then it got bent a little bit over in this direction. It was it's a wonderful story. I mean, Bill always talked about the flying blind period. Flying blind period, he said, was from the day he got sober until the book was published. So that's December of 34 to April of 39.
Okay.
And he said, we were just making it up as we went along during that period. We were going with what worked. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story. And some of it was pretty shocking to me, what I found. It just again, as I said earlier, it contradicted the stories I've been told throughout a lot of years in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, and maybe you can give us a pick, like an example.
Well,
Well,
you know, when the book first came out, I did probably 30 or 35 radio interviews, and almost always I was asked, "What was the most surprising thing you found when you were doing all this research in the archive?" And
yes.
I finally made a list. There was like 35 really surprising things, but there's always been three huge surprising things. One of them was that Bill Wilson was not an accurate historian, so that a lot of those stories he told were like parables. They were just really, they didn't stick to the facts because the facts were messy. He was looking to deliver a story that's going to catch a drinking alcoholic's attention and hopefully help him start to get sober, give up drinking. That was Bill. I mean, you know, I had a couple of guys come at me a couple of times with this. They said, "Well, Bill Wilson's a liar." I said, "No, he's not a liar. He's making up these myths. He's making up these stories. He's telling these parables because he wants to get your attention in a positive way so you can stop drinking." So he was, and there was a bunch of reasons for that. He left out messy details. He wanted to take the spotlight off himself. Everybody was always like, "Oh my God, Bill Wilson, he walks on water." And, you know, Bill knew he had an ego problem and he didn't need much of that stuff. So he was always diverting the attention from himself. And then there was a whole bunch of, you know, things that were just, he didn't want to talk about. They came from the Oxford group. The Oxford group is the soil, this early Christian movement that was going on in the 20s and 30s in the United States and England and all over, actually. But he didn't want to emphasize that and certainly didn't want to point to that because the Oxford group was in kind of disrepute when the book came out. The second thing was, you know, you hear all these stories about that, how the book was written and they sent the copies out to Akron, Ohio, and they fought over it in Akron, Ohio, and there was blood on the floor, and they marked them all up and sent them back to New York, and Bill made these changes. There's letters from Dr. Bob to Bill, and from Bill to Dr. Bob, most especially Bill to Dr. Bob, that says, you know, Bob, you know, I keep sending you these things, and you're just giving me nothing. All you're giving me is, he literally says in one place, he said, all I got from Akron was the warmest support. You know, and there's literally a letter where he says, you know, come on, Bob, you know, you've had those things for 2 weeks. You know, I need some feedback here. You're just not giving me anything. So one of the big shocks was that the people out in Akron had almost nothing to do with the first 164 pages of our book, almost nothing. And there's a whole bunch of reasons, and there's backstories, and there's wonderful stories about what's going on in Akron versus what's going on in New York and those kind of things. The third most shocking thing to me, the biggest piece of information, was that Hank Parkhurst was Bill Wilson's right-hand man in New York City. When Bill came home from getting Dr. Bob and a few other people sober in Akron in August of 1935, the first person he got sober in New York, up to that point, he'd gotten nobody sober in New York. The first person he got sober in New York was Hank Parkhurst. And he and Parkhurst were joined at the hip for the next 5 years. I mean, they were doing the deal. And Hank Parkhurst is the guy who's really driving the bus on this book project. He's the one who's lighting a fire under Bill Wilson over and over and over again to go back and do some more writing. And he's arguing with him all the time about what's going in the book and what he doesn't think should be going in the book. And he and Bill Wilson had very distinct ideas about what should be going in the book. But after doing all this research and looking at all this documentation, I feel very comfortable, and I say in most presentations that I do these days, no Hank Parkhurst, no big book. Would we have gotten a book at some point? Yeah. Would we have gotten a book on April 10th, 1939? No way. It just wouldn't have been. And of course, the longer the whole thing went on, we would have had a different, if it took 2 more years after that because Hank wasn't around pushing Bill all the time, then we would have had a different book. You know, it just would have been completely different. So those 3 things were real big shockers to me, that I couldn't trust Bill Wilson's stories from a historical point of view.
Uh-huh.
And that all these AA urban legends I'd heard about this being, you know, 100 guys wrote it and they all fought about it, and there was, you know, they were fighting about every page, every paragraph, every sentence, and Akron was in a part of that. Nope. did literally. It's not like I looked at some things and I thought, I don't think that happened. I looked at those things and it said, that did not happen. The Akron people were not behind this book project. And I mean, Bob was doing what he could for Bill. There's no doubt about it. Bill wanted some stories. For instance, they got 30 stories in the back of the first edition of the book, and 18 of those come out of Akron. But it was like pulling teeth for Bob. He couldn't. There was some people were on board with the project and they wrote their stories, but there was a bunch of people that should have written their stories who weren't going to write their stories. They thought Bill Wilson was going to make money off of this, and it was a big money-making project. And if they were going to write a story, they wanted a piece of. They wanted him to buy the story or to give them some sort of royalties out of the book project and all that sort of thing. So
wow, yeah, one never thinks about these things, right?
Yeah, well, but there it is. So there's this great story that Bob gets this this recently sober ex-newspaperman, Jim Scott, to help these guys write the story. Well, what really happened, I mean, that sounds like a lovely thing. Isn't that nice? But Bob's getting all kinds of pressure from Bill to get these stories done, and he can't get them done. So he sends Jim Scott out. Like, so Jim Scott goes over and sits with one of these guys, and they have a cup of coffee, and Jim asks him a whole bunch of questions. So he gets, what's going on with this guy and his sobriety and his story. And then Jim Scott goes back and writes the story. He writes the story based on sitting around having a cup of coffee with these guys. It's like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
No way. Okay, so how much of the big book did Bill really wrote?
Just about all of it. Just about all. Yeah, I mean, Bill Wilson wrote that book. There's no doubt about it. Bill Wilson wrote that book. Hank Parkhurst wrote the chapter to employers. But even those two chapters to wives and the family afterwards that say, oh, we are the wives of AA and we're going to tell you all about it.
Bill wrote that.
Bill Wilson wrote both of those chapters. He did.
Exactly. And the doctor's opinion.
Well, there's two little paragraphs. There's an introductory paragraph by Bill and then Silkworth's letter from July 27th, 1938. Silkworth published a number of articles in medical journals in 1937, 1938, and 1939. So, he was a good writer, and he had his own ideas and theories about alcoholism and how to cure alcoholism.
Okay. You know what is a headache for the rest of the world? How it was filled with expressions, idioms of that time.
Yeah.
Maybe Bill wasn't thinking about the rest of the world when he wrote, because it has so many idioms, old-fashioned, very intricate. They're so hard to translate.
Yeah.
You get my meaning, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely, Carlos. But I don't think Bill was a man of vision. I mean, he was really, really, he was interested in getting people sober everywhere, Dr. Bob was brilliant. He was just brilliant, but he wasn't part of this let's spread the message all over the United States of America, which is really where they were in the late 30s. They weren't thinking about Mexico or England or France or,
India.
Yeah, they were not thinking about that at the time. They were thinking about the United States of America. But Dr. Bob was brilliant working one-on-one. He really, really, really was. Bill Wilson called him after he died. He called him the Prince of the 12-steppers. The guy who could really work with alcoholics better than anybody else we'd ever learned. And it's true, Bob was getting people sober one-on-one in AA out in Ohio. And Bill wasn't getting anywhere near as many people sober in New York City one-on-one because he wasn't doing so much one-on-one work. He was writing this book. He wanted to get – when they got into the arguments with the people in Ohio about should we write a book, shouldn't we write a book, they were all claiming they was going to screw everything up. And Bill Wilson was like, they said, we should just keep with this word-of-mouth program. We've been spreading it through word of mouth. And Bill said, so how do you guys sleep at night when there's people dying out in California? And it's going to take years for the word-of-mouth program to get out there. How can you possibly sleep at night? So Wilson was a man, he really, really was a man of vision. I mean, this grand, spiritually based recovery vision of how people could restore themselves to a fruitful life and stop drinking and restore themselves to a fruitful life. And he was truly an amazing human being. You know, not just an amazing drunk who got sober. He was an amazing human being.
Most definitely. Exactly. Well, just to pick your brain, what about the LSD experience? I think I have a very clear opinion on that, but I would like to know because everybody, yeah, it's a very newbie thing, no?
It's in many ways that's outside of my area of what I would think of as my expertise. I mean,
Hmm.
my research in the archives, those 11 years, all
Yes.
were in 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938, and the first 6 months of 1939. That's it.
Hmm.
You start talking about something that happened in 1950 or 1960 or 1965, I've heard the same bogus stories you've heard in AA meetings, that I don't know what's right and what's true and what isn't. Personally, my understanding
Yes,
now,
yes.
now, now I haven't done this research, but I've been
Well,
exposed. So one of my good friends is Kevin Hanlon and his partner Dan Carasino, who did the Bill W. documentary that came out in 2012.
hmm,
And those guys know more about AA history put together than any five of us put together. I mean, they did amazing research for 7 years, 8 years before that movie came out. But you know, Kevin's very clear when he talks to me about this that Bill Wilson was looking for an alternative door that people could walk through to get a spiritual experience. And
uh-huh.
and that's what the whole. I mean, we're not talking about what was going on in San Francisco in 1965. This is early 1950s. It's just a whole different thing. There's a company in Switzerland, Sandoz, and they're the only manufacturers of this thing, and it only gets given to people by doctors, which is exactly what happened when they were doing this deal. And Wilson again was looking for people who are having a real problem with the God part of the whole thing.
Okay.
He was looking for them to have a deep and profound spiritual experience. Is there another way for people to get that? I got that white light experience, but is there another way for them to get that? Now, I've read the transcript at Stepping Stones archive of there was literally a transcript of what Bill Wilson said when he was under LSD the first time. And there's a doctor sitting right next to him, and then we got the doctor's notes right next to him. And Wilson's saying, "Oh my God, this is exactly like that experience I had at Winchester Cathedral, where he claims he had a white light experience there also. So when just before he went over to France for the First World War. So that's what he was looking for. And interestingly, Kevin and Dan, if you look at that 2012 movie, Bill W., they do an interview with a guy up in Canada who actually came to AA and didn't work for him, and then he did a little LSD experiment with one of the doctors that was doing it at the time, and the guy got sober and went back to AA and stayed sober ever since. He was like 50 years sober when they did the interview. So if you want to say that he lost his sobriety, he was taking drugs,
No, no, I
just
never.
like but
No,
again, Carlos, I've heard about it from other people who have done research, but I haven't done the research myself. So, but
I
my
understand.
understanding is I just think that's a lot of people want to take Bill Wilson down. They really do. They want to denigrate him and oh, Bill Wilson was a womanizer. You're screwing women all over AA. Can't find any evidence of that. Oh, Bill Wilson was taking drugs. He was doing all this bad stuff before he got before. No, I mean it just doesn't make sense to me. But
No, I totally understand. Yeah, actually, it makes perfect sense that he did that in those years in order to find a way to destroy people's egos, which it's what gets in the way of getting the message, right?
yes,
Nevertheless, I wanted to ask you that. And well, before the last question, what about, because this is very intriguing also, and since you have done so much research, obviously, and you have so much information, yes, there is a chapter, which is another like really interesting thing. In the, what is it? I don't know the translation. I know the name in Spanish, but it's Pass It On. There's a book with such name.
Yes, Pass It On. Yeah, it was written by Mel Barger. Good book. Good book.
Okay. Well, there's one chapter in that book about Bill speaking to the death.
Oh yeah. He was all over that.
It's a very short chapter. I've noticed. No?
That's another one of those interesting things. Now, of course, you got to realize that this whole spiritualism, it's called spiritualism, so that there are still spirits of the dead are around, and those spirits of the dead are contactable. You know, that happened. Now, there was a whole bunch of that stuff going on in the English-speaking world before the First World War. First World War was 1914 and 1918, but it really exploded after the First World War because so many parents had lost young sons in the war. So all of a sudden, mothers and fathers wanted to talk to their dead sons, and if they thought there was an opportunity to do that, they were finding mediums to do that. And there was a lot of people who were really, really Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote all the Sherlock Holmes books, for instance, was one of the leaders in this whole thing. He was just the leader in this whole thing. So it wasn't disrespectable in any kind of way. You know, it was a big deal that was widely accepted. Now, there were challenges to it. Harry Houdini, for instance, the great magician and escape artist, he had cut a deal with his mother that if in fact a medium ever got a hold of her after she died, she would tell him X, Y, Z, and that never happened. He was the great debunker. He used to out people all the time on the crazy things they were doing. But Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, they were both. It was part of the culture at the time, you know, that they would do this sort of thing. Now, in the Stepping Stones archive, there's, for instance, a document. There's a package of things that they call the Spook Book. The Spook Book, and I've read the Spook Book. I've been up there with my friend Jay Stinnett, who's an AA historian, who's doing research in that area, and to help him out, because you can only read so many things in an hour, I went up and helped him out doing that area. And one of the things I transcribed was the Spook Book. And he was doing that stuff. Now, personally, oh, by the way, my friend Jay, he's a firm believer in the whole spiritualist thing. He's a firm believer in it, you know. And quite frankly, Carlos, I am not. But Jay and I get along fine. It's okay, you know. When he's having one of his spiritualist moments, he'll call me on the phone and we'll be talking. He'll say, okay, now you got to prepare yourselves for some fingernails on the blackboard, because he knows it just makes me crazy when he starts talking about that stuff. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me intellectually, emotionally, or spiritually. But there are people who I respect and love that it makes profound sense to emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And I mean, we're all different, and our truths are all different, and our paths on life are all different. And what we all want to do, as it says in the book, we want to continue to enlarge our spiritual life. Jim, who puts the whiskey in his milk, the page before that, the quote-unquote old-timers, they probably had 2 years at the time, are wondering what Jim's problem is. He's had a bunch of slips, and they conclude, quote, that he, quote, failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Definitely. And that's what we all need to be doing. And if the whole spiritualism thing makes sense to you and it helps you enlarge your spiritual life, I'm all for it.
Okay, fantastic. It makes perfect sense to me. And now, what would you say this book you wrote is for the AA member only, or would it be interesting for the rest of the world?
You know, I mean, certainly the primary audience for it are people who are in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, Carlos, the first chapter of my book is called Challenging the Creation Myths. And I've told you about a whole bunch of things, little things I've mentioned that I found that just weren't true for the stories I've been told. It's amazing how many AA myths there are. I call them AA urban legends floating around. So the first chapter is Challenging the Creation Myths, and almost every chapter after that blows up one of those stories, one way or the other, based on primary documents from the time. But you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the most successful and largest and long-lived spiritual programs of the 20th century. I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous is really, really, really unique. I mean, there's the Oxford group went through a couple of iterations, but they've all but faded. I mean, they still have a over in Switzerland. They have a headquarters, and they're still trying to do stuff, but it's gone, Whereas there's 2 million members today, 2 million members around the world that are staying sober, people who are bad drunks, people who are ruining their lives and the lives of people all around them. There's 2 million of those people today, 2025, who are alive and well and sober because of this movement that started in 1935 in the United States. And I think the how these things get started, as I said, this thing could have gone off the rails a million different places, and it ended up being what it was because of Bill Wilson, what his beliefs were, and the stuff he tried to accommodate Hank Parker's for, because Parker's had his own ideas that were much less God-related than Bill Wilson's ideas. And so all those things came together and got this book. And let's face it, people are still reading the book. People are still getting sober on the book, despite all the terrible cliches and despite all the 1930s languages. I mean, there's so much stuff in there that makes no sense to people today when they come in. Women are particularly offended with the whole anti-feminist Two Wives chapter, and Hank's Two Employers chapter talks about an economics environment, an economic landscape that doesn't exist anymore today. I mean, it's gone completely. You don't go to work for GE and get a job for life. That's what those guys were doing back in the late 30s.
Yeah, definitely. I see your point.
So, in many, many, many ways, the book's outdated. Many ways, the book's outdated. I mean, its insistence on a personal relationship with a providential God, which is what it says very, very explicitly as your solution for your alcoholic problem of the insanity of picking up the first drink. That whole, we're in a much more, we've moved from religion to spiritual very, very strongly in the last 85, 90 years since that book was put together.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, but you were saying I thought the book never said anything about a specific God, or maybe I missed that. I'm sorry.
It doesn't say anything about a specific God. It does talk about the AA. So if you read Working with Others, I'm sorry. If you read We Agnostics, it's very, very clear. The only way to make sense out of that chapter is to realize that there are two basic presumptions Bill Wilson's got working for him before he walks into that thing. Number one, you need to get yourself a spiritual solution, and God equals spiritual, and spiritual equals God. There's no other way to get the spiritual except through this God thing. And you can have any idea of God you want. I got that. You can have any idea of God you want, but it's got to be a providential God, somebody that you can pray to and get help from. It's got to be that kind of a God. Be any kind of one of those gods, but it's got to be a providential God. And that's what Bill Wilson's talking about. But he doesn't. What he wants to avoid is all the crazy Christian arguments that have come out since Council of Nicaea in 324. And, it's just people have been arguing the details. And he's like, we don't care about the details. We just want you to establish a personal relationship with the God of your choice.
And your definition, right? If you don't have a definition of God, then basically you don't have a God. Because what if God is the universe, you see? And then...
Well, the problem, Parker's, for instance, I believe was what we would call a deist. A deist is somebody who believes that God, the creator, was here. He created the world. He created human beings. He created all the stuff we see. And then he went away. Then he left. Yeah. This is the God of Thomas Jefferson, for instance. He was a deist. Voltaire was a deist. They believed that God created the universe and went away. So in that case, you don't have anybody you can pray to get help from because he's gone. He's not listening anymore. Elvis has left the building, and just that sort of thing. So, certainly as Alcoholics Anonymous has expanded and become more tolerant and more open and made the umbrella under which people can comfortably come to meetings has gotten larger and larger. Mm-hmm. In the very beginning, this book was written by and understood by, white, male, 40-year-old Christian men. That's what it was, and that's who it talks to, and that's who it talks about, and that's who's the solution they offered was a solution that was familiar and comfortable to that class of people.
I understand. I understand. Well, it's been a pleasure. Most definitely. I enjoyed this conversation very, very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate getting the opportunity to chat with you, Carlos.
Definitely. We'll be recommending your book. So, how can we get the book?
Well, the book's available in English on Amazon. Easiest way to get it is go on Amazon and get it there. There's a Spanish translation of the book that should be published within the next 60 days. But maybe we'll get together and talk about that when that actually happens.
Most definitely. We have plenty to talk about. Especially, I have plenty to ask you, no? That's more like the reality. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for speaking with us. And let's hope we can be chatting again soon when the Spanish version of your book comes out.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate your time. Thank you.